Fox 5 and Hot 97 present Street Soldiers with Lisa Evers.
I'm so glad you're joining us for this episode of Street Soldiers on the Diddy trial. I'm your host, Lisa Evers. It's being called the trial of the decade, and we've never seen anything like this. International superstar Sean Diddy Combs charged with federal sex crimes. Add to that the nonstop media barrage of accusers with sensational stories. But none of that will matter in the courtroom, where it's about justice for a man who claims he's not guilty and for the alleged victims taking the stand to tell the world their truth. Once the darling of A-list red carpets and celebrity events, Sean Diddy Combs is now in the fight of his life. A win in federal court means his freedom. A loss means possibly dying behind bars. The decision ultimately made by 12 jurors. Jury consultant Faye Honig says you can't overstate the importance of the jury's composition.
The makeup of the jury is incredibly important. It dictates the conversations that the jurors are going to have. It dictates the amount of time that they're really going to be able to take and look at the evidence and be willing to say, you know, I may not like everything that's going on, but the government hasn't proven it beyond a reasonable doubt.
There are enormous concerns about pre-trial publicity on both sides. The number of Diddy documentaries and salacious stories continues. Their impact on public perception and jurors is difficult to measure, or maybe not. Look at what happened to R. Kelly, says New York Post lifestyle reporter Asia Grace.
I feel the same can and will and is happening here with Diddy. There's constantly a new documentary, a new series, a new tell-all, somebody who's worked with him or who was under the bad boy label. They're coming out and speaking their truth.
Throughout it all, Diddy's legal team has issued blanket denials to all charges and accusations. Criminal defense attorney Phillip Hamilton believes the case will be won or lost on the defense attorney's cross-examination of the government's witnesses, which will include alleged victims.
So how effectively they can cross-examine under the variables and the stress that they are under in this case with the voluminous evidence and everything along those lines, I think is where the case is going to be won or lost.
Let's break this all down with our panel. Joining us is Faye Honig. She's a jury consultant. She's the director of jury research for Dubin Research and Consulting. Faye, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
We appreciate it. Also with us is Asia Grace. She's a New York Post lifestyle reporter, and she's host of the Post Poppin'. Asia, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, Lisa.
We really appreciate it. Also joining us is Phillip Hamilton. He's a criminal defense attorney and managing partner of Hamilton Clark LLP. Phil, thanks so much for being with us. We appreciate it.
Always good to be with you, Lisa. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Phil, you've tried a lot of cases. You tried many federal cases as well. Have we ever seen anything like what we're seeing with Diddy right now?
I mean, from a criminal standpoint, we certainly live in a society where we've seen our fair share of these over the years. You go all the way back to OJ. You can go back prior to that, right? But I think let's at least say a lot of millennials, a lot of Gen X, right? Like those that kind of came up as Diddy was making his rise all the way to the top. Let's just be frank. I don't know if we've seen anything like this level of power being brought down. I know we have Weinstein, we have some others along the way in the entertainment industry who've seen their fair share of, what a lot of people would say justice over the course of the last 6 to 7 years. But this is on a whole other level. And I think what we're about to see and what we're about to hear, maybe it could be a little bit more akin to R. Kelly in regards to giving us a little bit more of a backdrop and an understanding of what's going on in the shadows of the entertainment industry. And I think this trial will shed a lot of light on that. But even with respect to R. Kelly, this is just at an entirely different level, Lisa.
Oh, absolutely. And Asia, what role does social media play in this, making this a totally different level? Because there's so much going on. There's been so much talk. Anybody can get on their phone and do something. What impact do you see that having?
I mean, honestly, to Phil's point, yes, us millennials have had to live through a number of unprecedented events without our say-so. We've had front row seats to the 9/11 catastrophe, the pandemic, and now the potential disintegration of Puff Daddy, which is bananas. And it will likely be O.J. Simpson level must-see TV, whether cameras will be in the courtroom or not. You know, the media coverage and the social media coverage is going to be like we've never seen before. And this trial, once it begins, it's going to be like catnip to the content creators because everybody is going to have something to say about everything that happens during these proceedings, from the bombshell evidence and testimony to whether or not Diddy takes the stand, to if his children show up, if his mother shows up, if other A-list celebrities come to either support him or potentially testify against him. It's going to be like we've never seen before. Okay, ghosts are going to want to come back from the dead to commentate on this on social media. It's going to be crazy.
Faye, you've worked on high profile as a jury consultant on high profile trials before. Is it possible for a celebrity, somebody this famous of this magnitude, to actually get a jury that's going to give them a fair trial?
You know, it's interesting because the concern here is that half of his jury pool is in his fan club, and the other half have already judged him as guilty based on the headlines, right? So it's so important for a trial consultant and for the legal teams to really look at who these jurors are. And that means looking at their social media, making sure there's no what we call stealth jurors. So jurors that are coming in saying they can be fair and impartial, but then are posting about it all over the social media, or just want to be close to a celebrity to, sit in a high profile trial. It's very tricky who's giving you an honest answer and who's giving you answers that they think will get him onto the jury.
What about, you worked on the Weinstein on the first trial. What was that like, trying to get a jury together?
It takes a long time. We also had a juror questionnaire in that one. I mean, Phil, you mentioned, what is this akin to, right? I think you could also compare this a bit to Glenn Maxwell. The procedure is very, very similar. There also is a juror questionnaire. The good thing is that they're planning to distribute it to almost 600 people. So there's going to be time to really root through these questionnaires. We don't know what the final questionnaire looks like yet. The prosecution asked for 23 questions. The defense asked for 72. We can imagine it'll be somewhere within that. But, the first step in all of this is for the legal teams to really look through those questionnaires and figure out who has an immediate hardship, who's an immediate cause challenge. So hopefully they're going in, and I love a juror questionnaire. It makes things much more efficient. People are much more forthcoming than they would be in open court. So you're going to get to the point of open court where you've at least gotten rid of a good amount of people that off the bat say they cannot be fair and impartial. They have heard way too much about the story, and they cannot sit as a good juror in this case.
More on this fascinating case when we come back. Phil, in terms of the actual case itself, there's still questions that I keep getting. I'm sure you get them in a lot of places too. People are asking, if this is a sex trafficking case, why has Diddy been the only person named on these indictments, the first one and then the superseding indictment?
I mean, I like how the question centers around why is he the only one named, because that's certainly not synonymous with is he the only one charged? We don't know. I think the trial will ultimately start to reveal some more of those details, because to the extent that there are cooperating witnesses who may in fact have their own charges as relate to the sex trafficking that's alleged in this underlying case as against Diddy, we shall see. So it doesn't mean that he's, quote unquote, the only one caught up in this. There may be, several, if not a dozen or more people caught up in this. I can't say for certain, of course, but what I can certainly say is that he is at the top of any organization that is alleged to have been sex trafficking for the purposes of his benefit, his enjoyment, and all of the other underlying allegations that have been put forth against him. And so everyone that may have come under the purview of federal investigation, when they started to have to name names, whose name are they going to name? His, Sean Combs.
Asia, in terms of when we look at Diddy, a lot of times he gets described as hip hop star or hip hop celebrity and businessman, but his whole presence, his persona, and the way he's impacted people's lives is much greater than that.
Oh, absolutely. This guy was our kingmaker. He was our hit maker. He was our taste maker, because he fueled what was cool in a way that so many other people really couldn't or didn't. They didn't reach the level of stardom he did. Everything that we did growing up in hip hop culture, in pop culture in general, in the 90s and the 2000s were influenced by Diddy. His name was at the top, and his name is still at the top, as we just mentioned, because of his influence. There was nothing that he couldn't do. And unfortunately, we're finding out now, and we'll be finding out more as the trial proceeds, that there were some things that he potentially did that weren't so great.
Faye, if you're consulting for the Diddy defense team, if you were to, what are some of the things that you would consider like do's and don'ts for jurors that would be like red flags to you, aside from the obvious things of people going, oh, I know he's guilty, or no, he couldn't have done any of that? Like, give us some insight on that, please.
Sure. So in a trial like this, especially when it's something so high profile, I would hope and assume that the defense has done some sort of jury testing. So either a mock trial, a focus group, a survey, I know TMZ kind of did some ones. So that's interesting. And, the data really drives the profile. For the defense, I would be looking out for, people who themselves or someone close to them has been sexually assaulted or abused. They definitely do not want anyone like that on their jury. Also, just given the nature of the allegations, you also have to find people who are open to talking about and having kind of these uncomfortable conversations in the first place. So exactly what Phil said, right? So their argument is going to say it was consenting adults. Everyone knew what they were getting into. So they'll certainly want jurors who will hold adults personally responsible for the things they do and don't believe that people can be manipulated or psychologically influenced. Someone that'll say, you went there, you knew what was going on, you walked in, there were lights and cameras, like, what did you think was happening, right? And finally, no one's going to like what they hear in this case, I assume. But the defense will really be trying to find people who are going to have an open mind, can look critically at the evidence, and who are going to accept the anticipated defense that things were consensual. So people who can take a step back and say, okay, I don't have to like this, but if the government doesn't prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt, I have to find him not guilty.
Phil, what about one of the things that's come out also too with the superseding indictment with the additional charges, which it's now up to 5. The defense team for Diddy is saying, okay, this was consensual sex. There was drug abuse. Of course, he had a substance abuse problem. If the government is saying it's trafficking, then you're basically saying that his ex-girlfriends were prostitutes. How do you respond to that? How do you explain that?
Or that he was forcing them, again, the government is going to say, into these commercial sex acts, which we've all come to now know allegedly took place within these freak offs, right? That, maybe at the end of the day, I was okay with traveling for you, Sean Combs, and I was okay for, hanging out with you. But like, then once we're getting drugged up and we're getting liquored up and I'm ending up in these freak off type orgies that at least the underlying allegations are putting forth, I didn't consent to, but by that point, I was coerced into it because of your power. And by the time on the other side of what happened, I'm being threatened, or you're sending people out to make it clear I can't say anything. That's the government's case. But like, on the flip, look, the defense is going to, be very clear about what you just said, Lisa. You knew exactly what you were getting into, and you were happy to get into it. This was your opportunity to chase fame, to chase clout, to chase recognition. And when things didn't work out for you, when you didn't get that deal, or maybe you did get that deal and your career didn't go as far as you thought that it would, now you're jumping on this bandwagon. The minute that Cassie's lawsuit went viral and all of this investigation started and the indictments came, now you're just jumping on, right? And you're just being a part of this train wreck that ultimately is headed directly toward my client. So, that's where the defense is going to be coming from on this. And, how that plays out, to Faye's point, it really depends on who you get on the jury.
Asia, what about the narrative and just kind of the changing opinions we've seen throughout this whole saga of the first revelations about Diddy coming out, with the Cassie case, and then people doubted that, but then there was that video, and then there was a shifting, and at first it was like, oh, these women are just looking for a check. Then after that video, people were like, wow, this is really happening. Do you think the narrative has shifted a lot, or what do you see? What's your sense?
Absolutely. And I mean, hip hop culture, for better or worse, it is often fueled by a lot of sex, drugs, rock and roll vibes. These are people that are from the projects in a lot of cases that, by the grace of God and some talent, shot up to superstardom. And so, of course, every day is this opulently luxurious party, and there's girls and there's liquor and there's trips and jewelry, and everyone wants to be a part of the ride. So for a long time, if there was ever a whistleblower that kind of, pointed out some misconduct, they would just kind of be shooed away, and yeah, you're a clout chaser. Well, you had no business being there. But now, thanks to the Me Too movement, and again, with some of the things that we've now learned about Cassie's claims and the video that we saw, that narrative has completely changed, where people's hearts were completely, I guess, dedicated to Diddy, and just kind of always seeing him come from out of the shadows and be successful, be victorious, whether it was some legal issue or whatever was going on in the headlines. He always could kind of beat it. But with everything that we are seeing and what social media is kind of taking in and consuming, it's not so easy this time. His defense team may have to truly eat its Wheaties because of the documentaries, because of the constant social media updates, and people literally becoming overnight reporters where they're going through the legal documents and commentating on it online. Things have changed so severely, and because of Diddy's status, because he, in a lot of ways, outranked R. Kelly and in a lot of circles, maybe even outranked Bill Cosby, if you will, just in the way of his status and his carriage, where Bill Cosby was like, the sweet, funny grandpa, Diddy was the man. And for all of this to now be coming out and coming together right before this trial, it's going to be a spectacle. It's going to be something to see.
Faye, when it's a case that involves alleged sexual misconduct and it's female victims, and in some cases, in this case, male victims, like, do you, as a jury consultant, do you find women are more understanding of that? Do you find men are more understanding, or are there no rules?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. And gender is always a very interesting issue in any sexual assault case, especially where the defense is consent. And the thing I'll say is that they should do jury research and go with the data. The data will tell you who is good and who is bad for you in the specific instance. Sometimes it's counterintuitive, right? You'd think female jurors would be more likely to side with female victims, but in these consent cases, female jurors can sometimes judge female victims much more harshly because they say, well, I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have voluntarily gone into these situations, right? So gender is always a very interesting one.
Phil, do you put Diddy on the stand if it's looking really bad? Would you risk that as a defense attorney?
No.
Agreed.
Why not? Because he may think, well, no, if they see me, if they hear me. But a lot of people who've worked around Diddy and been around Diddy was known for his short temper. Let's just leave it at that.
Look, what I'll say is, like, Trump found a way to not take the stand. And like, if we're talking about the competing of egos here, right? Like, I'm probably gonna give Trump the edge on Diddy, and he found a way to not take the stand. It wouldn't be good because probably a lot of what the defense is going to be fighting to keep out, and I'm sure they will get some rulings in their favor that the government can't bring up on their case in chief, right? Like maybe not talking about this particular incident or this particular prior bad act or a shooting in a club back in 1999, right? Like these kinds of things that otherwise wouldn't come out. Once your client takes the stand, your client better be perfect or close to as much in a case like this with these kinds of charges, because what's going to happen is you put him on the stand. Now it's a trial about his whole life, right? And every bad decision he's made along the way and all the maybe bad people he's been around, like just like a light that you don't necessarily want shown unless you have to do it or you have something that is so worth what's going to come out from your client that weighs against whatever bad stuff is going to be thrown at him or her.
Asia, I don't know if it's ever even happened, if they allow a camera or pool feed inside a federal courtroom like that. So a lot of the things that people are going to be getting, if you're not actually there in the courtroom, for most of the world, it's going to come through reporters, it's going to come through social media. Well, how do you see that social media versus legacy media landscape?
Well, it's my hope and belief that traditional media will always be king. We'll have during this trial accredited and trusted reporters and experts and legal minds kind of guiding us through as the proceedings are ongoing. But of course, everyone does not turn on the news and watch TV anymore. Not everyone picks up a piece of a newspaper, unfortunately. So a lot of people do rely on what they're seeing and hearing on social media. And if that's you just have to make sure that you are verifying. People on social media can get on there and say anything. It is the wild, wild west.
Faye, what should we be keeping our eye on throughout this whole thing?
I think the most important thing, at least in terms of jury selection, is making sure the jurors are honest and you're doing full research on figuring out if they, have been following the cases, what they know about it, and really making sure to ask everything that can get you that fair and impartial jury. It's jury deselection, really, not selection. So having a good strike strategy of your absolute worst cannot live with jurors is going to be crucial.
And Phil, as we go through this trial, a lot of people starting out in the public opinion, a lot of people say, well, he's guilty. There's no way he's going to beat this case. But what should we be watching for as the trial proceeds in terms of things that might be changing that?
I think the case is going to be won or lost on defense cross-examination. I think it's going to be so powerful here because to date, the public, we've essentially just heard one version. We've read one version. The defense has put snippets out of its theory, but how the defense attacks the government's witnesses effectively, efficiently, and also, and I hope they keep this in mind, kind of empathetically, because you want to be careful about going in there and bruising, some of these witnesses up too much, because that can be a big turnoff for the jurors. So how effectively they can cross-examine under the variables and the stress that they are under in this case with the voluminous evidence and everything along those lines, I think is where the case is going to be won or lost.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Street Soldiers on the Diddy trial. You can watch it again on our Fox 5 NY YouTube page and on our Fox Local app on your phone and smart TV. Remember, use your mind, it's your best weapon. I'm Lisa Evers. Let's push for peace, love, and justice for all.